Thank you, Charlie.
Yeah, right there is fine.
Right there. First of all, I'd like to thank my friends in the Grinnell family, Charlie, Margie, John, Dwinda, old friends, close by neighbors, packing houses near each other, etc. I'm happy to be here.
Do I pay you now?
Not quite.
Oh, okay.
You folks don't know me because we've never lived in Zellwood, any of us. But we've had land holdings in Zellwood about 100 years. And it came about a long history. The history starts with Tsar Nicholas II in Russia in the 1890s. And Tsar Nicholas decided that he would conscript all the 15-year-old boys into the army because he wanted to expand greater Russia, kind of like Putin is doing right now. It starts with the army and 15-year-old boys, by the way. So, by the way, Tsar Nicholas was assassinated in 1913, and maybe Putin will get the same, but that's speculation. So my great-grandfather, Israel Shader, decided it's time to leave Russia. And they all got out of Russia in the early 1890s. Everybody went to Pittsburgh, 3 daughters, 3 sons, sons-in-laws, etc., and started working in the steel mills and making a little money. And after a number of years, in May of 1913, when you drive down 441 past Lee Road, and a half a mile on your right is a street called Shader Road. And that's my great-grandfather. That was an 80-acre farm purchased by the oldest grandson, my grandfather, Jacob Meitin, and Israel Shader. And it was a true working dairy farm. It came with 45 cows when they bought it on 80 acres and 20 acres of citrus. And the agriculture in those days was such that you would pen up the 45 cows in 5 acres for a week, then move them to the next 5 acres, and cows doing what they do when they get a bunch of hay, they fertilize 5 acres, 5 acres, 5 acres. Such was the nature of the times. From that point, the various son-in-laws bought little groves, 5 acres here, 10 acres in Conway, etc. But in 1922, and there was a land boom going on in Florida, they started buying land in Zellwood. On Round Lake Road, there was 2 20s across from each other and 1 on Round Lake. And that was the start of our purchases in Zellwood, 1922. So it's 100 years of owning land in Zellwood. They continued on to Ferndale at a 65 and a 20, 2 20s and a 65 there, and a 40 in Gotha. And by the time the middle 1920s came along, the 3 son-in-laws, my grandfather Meitin, Miller, and Shader, one of the sons, built a packing house on the railroad just north of Jones Avenue called MMS Fruit Company, long since gone. But that led to fresh citrus packing in Zellwood. From that point, times in the 30s were tough in Zellwood. Everybody had to have a job. So 6 of my father's generation went to New York State. And starting in Albany, Newburgh, Schenectady, Poughkeepsie, Mount Vernon, and one other town I forgot, they went to a storefront, rented a 20 by 40 storefront, and opened a fresh fruit and vegetable market in these towns along New York State, north to south. Well, my grandfather and his generation, 2 great uncles of mine, they ran the packing house and would send 1 or 2 carloads a week to each of these towns, and my father's generation would have fresh citrus to sell up there and buy potatoes and buy onions and run a true fruit and vegetable market. By the time 1940 rolled around, my father had 3 fruit and vegetable departments in Great Bear Markets, one of the very first chain stores. There was, of course, a fruit and vegetable section and a meat section, and then the rest of the store was hard goods that the store sold. There's a series of agricultural freezes that are important in all of this. In 1940, I am told my father was called by his father. His father was crying on the telephone. He'd never heard his father cry before. All of the trees that he had planted from 1914 to that date were frozen to the ground in a freeze in 1940, and it killed him within 2 weeks. So a couple years later, I was born in 42 in Albany, Dad decided to come back here and start Zellwood Fruit Distributors with the youngest of the Shader, my great uncle, Meyer Shader. There's a picture in the museum that everybody should look at. It's a 1952 picture of the packing house on the highway over here behind me. Fascinating picture with 35, I believe, ladies all in dresses because women did not wear pants for religious reasons and other such ordinances. And another 35 or 40. And Zellwood Fruit was an economic boon to the community, I would say, because employing 75 people on site in town was a little bit different. That was, instead of a 2 or 3 car a day packing house, this packing house here was a very efficient 10 or 12 boxcar loads a day packing house. Unfortunately, it burned down in the spring of 1960.
How old were you?
I was in college in Gainesville at the time, and the decision was made to, instead of rebuild on the site, and we had plans, etc., we went to Forest City, where the Fosgate family had sold out the frozen orange juice plant to Charlie Bradshaw High Acres Concentrate, and we rented that house for 5 years. In 1962, December the 9th, I was in Gainesville with a brand new car, ready to start work with a bachelor's degree in 1963, and it was 9 degrees in Gainesville and about 12 or 13 here. Big freeze in 62, 63. To my intense surprise, my father told me, after a few weeks of figuring out what was going on, the citrus business was just about dead. He said, "Julian, get yourself a job." I said, "What? Get myself a job?" Well, as it happens, I had pretty good grades, and the U.S. Department of Agriculture decided they would pay me, it's hard to believe, $150 a month for 2 years, tax-free, no tuition, paid for books, gave me classes for the first year, and the second year I did research, traveling the state of Florida to figure out the economic consequences of the freeze and how growers were affected by the actions of their citrus cooperatives. There's a federal publication in my name, and I should have got a PhD out of this, except they paid me, and the rules were, since they paid me, I couldn't get a PhD out of this. Be that as it may, moving onward, during this period of time, a fresh citrus packing house takes the most beautiful fruit, packs it into boxes and sends it off, but there are 15% or so green ones, scarred ones, misshapen ones that don't go in a fresh box, and they have to be called eliminations. You got to take them somewhere to be squeezed. In the early parts of these days, in the 1940s, only hot pack juice was around. It was pretty nasty stuff. But we were asked, Zellwood Fruit was asked to join 6 other partners in Winter Garden and build the first frozen orange juice plant in the area. And frozen orange juice became the thing. It got bigger and bigger. As we proceeded into the 50s through 1960 and onward, our business gradually transformed from fresh packing to frozen orange juice. And we had a pretty good run because there was a gap from 1962 to 1983, 21 years without a freeze. Now, if you think about that, if you keep growing and growing and trees get bigger and bigger, volume is where it's at. In any manufacturing business, we had a pretty good run. But then came the 83 freeze.
Yeah.
You know about that.
It was Sunday,
And
December the 25th.
Exactly. And then it came an 85 freeze. But as dealers, we kept buying and selling citrus, putting it into the frozen orange juice plant, and lasted through 2 freezes and high interest rates from, thank you, Mr. Carter. And it all worked out. But in January of 1988, our partners in the Winter Garden Cannery came to us and said, Ralph, my father, you're 75 years old. You've done everything you need to do to keep up with the rest of us, but we would like to buy you out. And they gave us an offer that we could not refuse. So in 1988, we sold out our partnership in Winter Garden Citrus. I know this comes off somewhat as high tales of whatever, but I had the good fortune of being able to sell off this site here across the street, this 8 acres industrial that you now have a nasty junkyard buying metals, etc. I sold 40 trailers, 4 Mack tractors, 12 buses, 15 goats, 500 tubs, 200 ladders, and a couple hundred workers. Sold it out, and then came the 89 freeze, which was the worst. And citrus is no more in Central Florida. But I can't complain at all about Zellwood as an economic home from our family. We always lived in Orlando. I grew up in College Park, went to Edgewater High School, etc. But as an economic home for doing good business with good people, hard workers, this was a great place. And that's pretty much my tale of the citrus industry as it affected our family.
In Zellwood.
There'll be a test later.
Thank you.
Got what you wanted?
That's what I wanted. I didn't know. That's exciting. That really was interesting.
It's,
I didn't know half of that. Wow.
no, it's family secrets.